Jerry Lewis made one joke too many about Dean Martin. What happened backstage shocked everyone who witnessed it. It was October 14, 1956, at the Copa Room in the Sands Hotel, Las Vegas. Martin and Lewis were headlining their usual late-night show, and the packed audience of 800 people was eating up every minute of their comedy routine. But what started as another successful performance was about to become the night that changed everything between America's most beloved comedy duo. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis had been partners for 10 years by 1956. They'd met at the Glass Hat nightclub in New York City back in 1946. Two struggling entertainers who discovered they had an almost supernatural chemistry on stage. Dean was the smooth crooner with the laid-back Italian charm, while Jerry was the manic, rubber-faced comedian who could make people laugh just by walking across a room. Their partnership had made them millionaires. They'd starred in 16 films together, sold millions of records, and commanded the highest fees in show business. But success had also created tensions that were becoming harder to hide, both from the public and from each other. The root of their problem was simple. Jerry Lewis had developed an ego that was growing larger by the day, while Dean Martin was getting tired of being treated like the straight man in Jerry's comedy empire. What had started as playful ribbing between partners had gradually evolved into something much more cruel and personal, especially when they were performing live. That October night in Las Vegas, their show had started normally enough. Dean opened with a few songs, "That's Amore" and "Memories Are Made of This," while Jerry waited in the wings, preparing for their comedy segment. The audience loved Dean's singing, but everyone knew they were really there to see the comedy team in action. When Jerry joined Dean on stage, the energy immediately shifted. Jerry was in one of his manic moods, bouncing around the stage like a hyperactive child, making faces at the audience and interrupting Dean's songs with his trademark goofy expressions and sound effects. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jerry announced to the crowd, "you've just heard from my partner Dean Martin, also known as the Voices, though some people call him the Noise." The audience laughed, and Dean smiled, that famous crooked smile of his. This was typical Jerry behavior, putting down his partner to get a laugh. Dean had learned to roll with it over the years, understanding that it was all part of the act. But as the show progressed, Jerry's jokes began taking on a sharper edge. He started making comments about Dean's drinking, which had become heavier in recent years as the pressures of their partnership mounted. "You know, folks," Jerry said, grabbing the microphone away from Dean, "people always ask me, Jerry, how do you and Dean prepare for a show?" "Well, I rehearse my material, and Dean rehearses opening bottles." The audience laughed, but there was something uncomfortable in the laughter. Dean's smile tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. This was crossing into more personal territory than their usual stage banter, but he'd dealt with worse from Jerry before. Jerry, however, was just getting warmed up. Sensing that the drinking jokes were getting a reaction, he doubled down. Dean's so used to drinking during shows that last week he tried to pour whiskey into the microphone. When I told him that's not how it works, he said, "Well, how else am I supposed to make this act more palatable?" Now the laughter from the audience was mixed with some uncomfortable murmurs. People could sense that this wasn't the usual playful teasing between partners. There was a mean-spirited quality to Jerry's jokes that was making even the most devoted fans feel uneasy. Dean tried to regain control of the situation by starting another song, but Jerry wouldn't let him. Every time Dean opened his mouth to sing, Jerry would interrupt with another put-down, another joke at Dean's expense. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Martin," Jerry announced with mock sincerity. "A man who's so dedicated to his craft that he's never performed a show sober. In fact, I think sobriety might actually be against his religion." The audience was starting to turn on Jerry now. These weren't funny observations about a comedy partner. They were personal attacks on someone who was standing right there trying to maintain his dignity while being humiliated in front of hundreds of people. Dean's face was beginning to show the strain. His trademark coolness was starting to crack. Those who knew him well could see the warning signs, the tightening around his eyes, the slight clenching of his jaw, the way his hands had formed loose fists at his sides. But Jerry Lewis was too caught up in his own performance to notice. He was getting laughs, and to Jerry, laughs were the only thing that mattered, regardless of who got hurt in the process. "You know what I love about my partner?" Jerry continued, his voice taking on a particularly cruel tone. Dean Martin is living proof that you don't need talent if you've got enough alcohol in your system. He's like a singing puppet, except instead of strings, he's controlled by whiskey. That was the moment when Dean Martin's legendary composure finally snapped. The change was visible to everyone in the room. Dean's face went from forced joviality to something much darker and more dangerous. The audience fell silent as they witnessed the King of Cool transforming into someone they'd never seen before. "Jerry," Dean said quietly into his microphone, his voice carrying a warning that only his partner seemed unable to hear. But Jerry Lewis was on a roll now, drunk on the power of having a captive audience and a target who couldn't fight back without ruining the show. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be serious for a moment," Jerry said, adopting a mock-serious tone. "Dean Martin has taught me so much about show business. He's taught me that if you can't sing well, sing loud. If you can't dance well, dance drunk. And if you can't tell jokes, partner with someone who can, and then drink until you forget how talentless you are." The audience was now completely silent. This had gone beyond comedy into something ugly and painful to watch. Several people near the front of the room could see the hurt and rage building in Dean Martin's eyes. Dean tried one more time to salvage the situation professionally. He walked to the edge of the stage, away from Jerry's microphone, and began singing Volare in Italian, hoping to redirect the show back to music and away from Jerry's increasingly vicious attack. But Jerry wouldn't let it go. He followed Dean across the stage and grabbed the microphone again. "Oh, this is perfect," Jerry announced to the crowd. "Now he's singing in Italian. You know why Dean sings in Italian, folks? Because when you're drunk enough, all languages sound the same anyway." That was the breaking point. Dean Martin stopped singing mid-sentence. He set down his microphone very carefully on the piano and looked at Jerry Lewis with an expression that sent a chill through everyone in the room who saw it. Without saying another word to the audience, Dean walked off the stage. Jerry, still not understanding the magnitude of what he had done, tried to save the show by launching into his solo comedy routine. But the audience was no longer with him. They had witnessed something uncomfortable and cruel, and they weren't in the mood for more comedy from the person who had just systematically humiliated his own partner. Backstage, Dean Martin was pacing in their shared dressing room like a caged animal. His hands were shaking with rage, and for the first time in his adult life, he was seriously considering physical violence against another person. When Jerry finally came off stage 15 minutes later, after bombing spectacularly with an audience that was now completely turned off by his behavior, he walked into the dressing room still not fully comprehending what he had done. "Tough crowd tonight," Jerry said casually as if nothing unusual had happened. "I think maybe we should try some new material tomorrow." Dean turned around slowly to face his partner of 10 years. Jerry Lewis, for all his comic genius, had always been emotionally tone-deaf when it came to reading people's feelings. He looked at Dean's face and still didn't see the danger he was in. "Dean, you look upset," Jerry said with that same manic energy he'd shown on stage. "Don't worry about tonight. These Vegas crowds are always weird. Tomorrow we'll kill them." Upset. Dean's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than if he had been shouting. "Jerry, do you have any idea what you just did out there?" Jerry shrugged, still not getting it. "I was being funny. That's what I do. That's what we do." "What we do?" Dean stepped closer to Jerry, and for the first time, Jerry began to sense that something was seriously wrong. "What we do is supposed to be a partnership. What you did out there was assassination." "Come on, Dean," Jerry said, his voice taking on a slightly nervous quality. "It was just jokes. You know I don't mean anything by it." "Just jokes?" Dean's voice was rising now, and people in the hallway outside their dressing room were starting to stop and listen. "You called me a talentless drunk in front of 800 people, Jerry. You humiliated me, you embarrassed me, and you did it with a smile on your face like you were doing me a favor." Jerry, finally beginning to understand that he had crossed a line, tried to backpedal. "Dean, I'm sorry if I went too far. You know how I get when I'm performing. I get carried away." "You get carried away?" Dean stepped even closer, and Jerry instinctively backed toward the wall. "For 10 years, I've put up with your ego, your tantrums, your need to be the center of attention every second of every day, but I never ever humiliated you in public. I never made you look like a fool in front of people who pay to see us perform." Dean, calm down, Jerry said, his voice now clearly nervous. Let's talk about this rationally. Rationally? Dean laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk rationally? Okay, let's be rational. You just destroyed 10 years of partnership with your big mouth and your complete inability to understand that other people have feelings. Jerry was now backed against the wall of the dressing room, and Dean was standing directly in front of him, close enough that Jerry could smell the anger radiating from his partner. I said I was sorry. Jerry tried again. What more do you want from me? That's when Dean Martin did something that no one who knew him would have believed possible. The king of cool, the man who never lost his temper, who never raised his voice, who prided himself on staying calm under pressure, grabbed Jerry Lewis by the collar of his shirt and pushed him hard against the dressing room wall. What I want, Dean said, his voice shaking with rage, is for you to understand that I'm not your punching bag. I'm not your straight man. I'm not your comedy prop. I'm your partner. And if you can't treat me with basic human respect, then we don't have a partnership anymore. Jerry Lewis, who had never seen Dean Martin lose control like this, was genuinely frightened. The physical strength in Dean's hands, the fury in his eyes, the complete transformation from cool professional to enraged human being. It was like seeing a completely different person. Dean, let go of me, Jerry said, his voice barely steady. You're scaring me. Good, Dean replied, tightening his grip on Jerry's collar. Because you should be scared. You should be scared that you just threw away the best thing that ever happened to your career. You should be scared that your ego is so out of control that you can't tell the difference between comedy and cruelty. And you should be scared that after tonight, everything changes between us. For a moment, the two men stared at each other. Dean with his hands on Jerry's collar, Jerry pressed against the wall, both of them breathing heavily from the intensity of the confrontation. Around them, the dressing room was completely silent, except for the distant sounds of the casino beyond their door. Finally, Dean released his grip and stepped back. Jerry slumped slightly against the wall, smoothing down his shirt and trying to regain his composure. Dean, Jerry started to say, but Dean held up a hand to stop him. I'm done for tonight, Jerry. I'm going back to my hotel, and I'm going to think very carefully about whether I want to continue this partnership. Because if this is what we've become, or if this is what you think entertainment is, then I don't want any part of it. Dean picked up his jacket from a chair and headed for the door. Just before he reached it, he turned back to face Jerry one more time. And Jerry, if you ever humiliate me like that again, in public or private, I'll do more than grab your collar. We clear on that? Jerry nodded wordlessly, still too shaken to speak. Dean opened the door and walked out, leaving Jerry Lewis alone in the dressing room with the sudden terrible understanding that he had just destroyed the most successful partnership in show business history. Word of the Backstage Confrontation spread quickly through the entertainment industry. People who had been there that night talked about the tension they'd witnessed, the uncomfortable cruelty of Jerry's performance, and the shocking moment when the unflappable Dean Martin had finally lost his cool. Within 6 months, Martin and Lewis had officially announced the end of their partnership. Their final performance together was at the Copacabana in New York City on July 25, 1956, where they went through the motions of their act with professional courtesy, but none of the chemistry that had made them famous. Years later, when asked about the breakup, Dean Martin would only say, "Sometimes people grow in different directions, and sometimes they just grow apart." Jerry Lewis, for his part, would spend decades trying to downplay his role in the partnership's demise, often claiming that it was Dean's drinking or Dean's desire to pursue a solo career that caused the split. But those who were in the dressing room at the Sands Hotel that October night knew the truth. The night Jerry Lewis made one joke too many was the night he learned that even the coolest man in show business had a breaking point. And when Dean Martin reached his breaking point, he didn't stay cool. He got even. The legacy of Martin and Lewis lives on in their films and recordings, a testament to what they accomplished together. But for those who understand the real story behind their breakup, their partnership serves as a reminder that success means nothing if you don't treat the people closest to you with respect and dignity. Sometimes the funniest man in the room forgets that behind every straight man is a human being with feelings, pride, and a limit to how much humiliation they'll accept, even in the name of entertainment. If this story about standing up for yourself moved you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories from Hollywood's golden age. Have you ever had to confront someone who crossed the line with their jokes? Share your experience in the comments below, and remember to ring that notification bell for more amazing behind-the-scenes stories about the legends of entertainment.